When Dr. Michael Harrison saw fabric in the lioness's mouth, every cell in his body turned to ice. 37 years he'd worked with wildlife. He'd sutured elephant wounds, delivered breached giraffe calves, removed porcupine quills from leopard paws. But this, fabric, meant human. Fabric meant child. Fabric meant he was about to witness something no veterinarian should ever see. The morning had started ordinary. Dawn light spilling gold across the Tanzanian grassland, acacia trees casting long shadows like dark fingers reaching across the earth. Michael sat in his jeep on a slight elevation, binoculars raised, documenting lion movements near the Maasai village border. Routine observation work. The kind of peaceful field work that had drawn him to Africa 3 months ago after Margaret died and his Oregon house became too silent to bear. He'd spotted the lioness at 200 meters, moving through the tall grass with purpose. Not hunting, her posture was wrong for that, not patrolling territory either. She moved like she carried something precious, her head lowered at an unusual angle, her gait careful and measured. Michael adjusted the binocular focus, trying to see what she held. Blue fabric. His breath caught. Blue cotton fabric, the kind used in traditional Maasai clothing, dangling from her jaws like a flag of catastrophe. His hands moved automatically, reaching for the radio mounted on the dashboard. Emergency protocol for wildlife attacks was clear. Immediate contact with village leadership. Alert the medical response team. Document the location. He'd practiced this scenario in training sessions, but never imagined executing it. Not like this. Not watching a lioness carry what had to be. He stopped, his finger frozen above the radio button. The lioness wasn't moving like a predator with prey. Michael had studied felid behavior for decades, had watched zoo lions carry enrichment toys, had observed mothers transport cubs. This lioness moved with that same deliberate gentleness. She placed each paw carefully, avoiding rocks and uneven ground. Her jaw position showed restraint, not the clamping grip of a kill. The fabric was clean, unwrinkled, no blood visible even from this distance. Michael's scientific training warred with what his eyes showed him. Predators don't carry human children gently. Predators don't avoid obstacles to prevent jostling their prey. Predators don't approach veterinary vehicles at dawn carrying living. Through the binoculars, he saw small hands, fingers that moved, grasped weakly at the fabric. The child was alive. His mind refused what his eyes showed him. The scientific part of his brain, the part trained in biology and animal behavior, screamed that this was a predator carrying prey. But the fabric was clean, unwrinkled, and the lioness walked like a mother carries a cub. His hand froze on the radio. The temperature was already rising, though the sun barely cleared the horizon. Dust hung in the air, visible in those golden rays that made everything look surreal. Michael could see the Maasai village 3 kilometers southeast, morning cooking fires just beginning to send thin smoke into the pale sky. Somewhere in that village, a family was probably discovering a child missing. Somewhere, a grandmother was screaming, and here, a lioness was bringing that child directly toward his jeep. Michael set down the radio, picked up his tranquilizer rifle with shaking hands, checked the loaded dart. Standard sedative dosage for an adult female lion. His protocol training said never assume a lion's intentions, always prepare for aggressive behavior. Protect yourself first. But nothing about this felt aggressive. The lioness continued her approach, 150 meters, 100, her amber eyes fixed on his vehicle, not scanning the territory for threats or checking for competing predators. She had a destination. She had chosen this path deliberately. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. Sweat trickled down his spine despite the morning coolness. He was a zoo veterinarian, semi-retired, volunteering at a wildlife reserve because he needed purpose after Margaret's death. He'd treated lions behind barriers, through caged doors, under sedation. He'd never faced one in open territory carrying a human child like an offering. 70 meters now. 60. The lioness's ears were forward, not flattened back in aggression, not swiveling to track sounds. Forward, focused, fixed on him. Michael lifted his binoculars again with trembling hands. What he saw through those magnified lenses made him forget to breathe. Through the magnified lenses, Michael saw the child's face. A boy, perhaps 3 years old, his round cheek streaked with tears and dust. His eyes were squeezed shut, his small mouth open in a wail Michael couldn't hear yet across the distance. But the child was crying. Crying meant breathing. Breathing meant alive. The lioness's jaw grip was positioned exactly as it would be for carrying a cub. Gentle pressure on the fabric bunched at the child's back and shoulders, avoiding the neck, avoiding vital areas. Michael had watched mother lions carry young dozens of times in zoo settings. The grip was identical, instinctive, protective. His veterinary training catalogued details automatically. The lioness's ears remained forward, not the flattened, aggressive posture. Her tail hung low, just the tip twitching, calm, not the lashing motion of agitation. Her stride stayed measured, deliberate. She wasn't stalking, she wasn't displaying dominance, she was transporting. 50 meters now. Michael could hear the child's cries, high and piercing in the morning stillness. The sound cut through him like surgical wire. That wail was terror and exhaustion and the desperate confusion of a toddler who didn't understand why the world had become nightmare. The lioness stopped at 40 meters. Set the child down carefully on the dry grass, backed away 5 steps, then 10. She sat, just sat in the grass, her amber eyes fixed on Michael's jeep, her tail curled around her paws, waiting. The child lay where she'd placed him, crying harder now without the warmth of her body. His small hands reached upward toward nothing, grasping at air. He wore traditional Maasai clothing, a small blue shuka cloth wrapped around his body, now twisted and damp with saliva, but showing no tears, no blood. Michael's hands shook so badly the binoculars rattled against the steering wheel. This couldn't be happening. In 40 years of veterinary medicine, he'd never read a case study, never heard a colleague mention, never seen documentation of a wild lion showing this kind of restraint with human prey. Because humans were prey, that was the hierarchy, that was nature. But nature wasn't following its own rules this morning. The lioness remained sitting, utterly still except for her steady breathing and that gentle tail-tip movement. She made no motion to approach the child again, made no motion to approach the jeep. She'd delivered something, and now she waited for Michael to understand. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought it might crack bone. His veterinary textbooks never prepared him for this. 20 years of zoo medicine, thousands of hours studying felid behavior, none of it explained a wild lioness carrying a human child like precious cargo. I've documented hundreds of predator behaviors. I've seen mothers carry cubs, males drag kills, juveniles play with prey. Every grip, every posture, every movement follows predictable patterns written in millions of years of evolution. What Michael witnessed that morning broke every pattern. The child's wails intensified, echoing across the grassland. Birds scattered from nearby acacia trees. Somewhere in the distance, zebras called their barking alarm. The world was waking to witness the impossible. Michael set down the binoculars. His hands found the tranquilizer rifle, then released it. The lioness showed no aggression. Her body language read as calm, expectant, almost. He couldn't believe he was thinking this, almost pleading. He reached for the radio again, started to press the call button, stopped. What would he say? A lioness just delivered a living human child to my Jeep? They'd think heat stroke, hallucination. They'd send a medical evacuation for him, not rescue for the child. The boy's crying grew weaker. Exhaustion or dehydration was setting in. Michael could see, even from this distance, that the child's lips looked dry, his movements becoming sluggish. However long he'd been missing, he needed water, medical attention, safety. The lioness remained motionless, watching. Her amber eyes caught the rising sun and reflected it back like molten gold. There was something in that gaze Michael couldn't name, something that made his scientific training feel small and insufficient. The lioness took 3 more steps backward, giving him space, giving him permission. Then she lowered herself to the ground completely, her belly against the grass, her paws extended forward, the ultimate non-threatening posture. A predator making herself vulnerable. What happened next made Michael question everything he knew about wildlife. Michael's legs moved before his brain gave permission. He opened the Jeep doors slowly, the metallic click sounding impossibly loud in the stillness. The lioness's ears swiveled toward the sound, but she didn't rise, didn't tense. She watched him with those gold eyes that held something he'd never seen in a wild predator. Patience. He stepped onto the packed earth, his boots crunching against dry grass. 20 meters separated him from the child, 40 meters from the lioness. Every instinct screamed at him to get back in the vehicle. Protocol demanded it. Safety required it. But the child's cries were weakening, becoming whimpers. Michael took 1 step forward. 2. He kept his body angled slightly sideways, non-threatening, his hands visible and empty. The tranquilizer rifle remained in the Jeep. If the lioness charged, he had no defense, just trust in behavior that defied everything he knew. "It's okay," he murmured, not sure if he was speaking to the child, or the lioness, or himself. "It's okay." The lioness watched, just watched. Her tail tip twitched once, twice. Her breathing remained steady, visible in the rise and fall of her flanks. Michael reached the child and dropped to his knees. His hands shook as he touched the small shoulders, feeling for injuries his eyes might have missed. The boy flinched at the contact, his crying spiking again, but he didn't pull away. Too exhausted, too frightened, no blood. Michael's fingers moved with practiced efficiency, checking the child's neck, arms, legs, torso. No puncture wounds, no lacerations, no broken bones. The fabric of the shuka was damp with saliva, but intact. He lifted the cloth carefully. Pressure marks, that's all. Gentle indentations across the child's back and shoulders where teeth had gripped fabric and skin beneath. The same marks a mother lion would leave carrying a cub. Pressure, without penetration, careful, controlled. In that moment, Michael's entire understanding of predator behavior shattered like dropped glass. This wasn't aggression. This wasn't hunting behavior. This wasn't even tolerance. This was something that shouldn't exist outside fairy tales, a wild apex predator delivering a human child to safety. The boy's skin was hot to the touch, dehydrated. The sun exposure had begun its work. His cheeks were flushed, his lips cracked. Michael estimated he'd been missing at least 4 to 6 hours, maybe more, long enough to be in serious danger, not long enough for the damage to be irreversible. "I've got you," Michael whispered. He gathered the child against his chest, feeling the small body trembling. "You're safe now." He stood slowly, keeping his movement smooth. The child weighed almost nothing in his arms, a fragile bundle of heat and fear and improbable survival. Michael turned toward the Jeep, took 1 step. The lioness rose. Michael's heart stopped. His muscles locked. Every prey instinct in his primate brain screamed run, but running from a lion was suicide. He stood frozen, the child clutched against him, and waited for her decision. She took one step forward, two, then stopped. Their eyes met across 15 meters of African grassland. Michael had looked into the eyes of lions before, zoo animals, sedated patients, photographs. This was different. There was intelligence in that gaze, recognition, something passing between them that had no name in his veterinary textbooks. The lioness's tail swished once, a long, slow sweep through the air. Then she turned away from him, from the child, from the jeep. She walked 10 paces into the grass, paused to look back over her shoulder one final time, and disappeared into the golden waves of vegetation that covered this ancient land. The morning sounds returned gradually. Bird calls, distant zebra barks, the whisper of wind through acacia branches. Michael stood holding the child, staring at the grass where she'd vanished, and felt tears blur his vision. When Michael's hands touched the boy's warm skin and found it unbroken, tears blurred his vision. 40 years of veterinary medicine couldn't explain this tenderness. A predator built to kill had carried life instead. He held the crying child against his chest and felt something inside himself break open, not from grief this time, but from impossible beauty. He carried the child to the jeep, placed him carefully on the passenger seat, and reached for the water bottle with shaking hands. The boy drank in desperate gulps while Michael radioed the village. What he learned next made the morning's impossibility even more staggering. The radio crackled to life almost immediately. "This is Elder Lebu. Who calls?" Michael's voice came out rough, unsteady. "Dr. Harrison, I have—" He paused, looking at the child drinking water in small, desperate sips. "I have a missing child. A boy approximately 3 years old, Maasai clothing. He's alive but dehydrated." Silence on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. "You found him? You found Nasha?" The elder's voice cracked with something between disbelief and desperate hope. "Where? How badly is he hurt?" 6 kilometers northwest of the village, near the Acacia Grove observation point. Michael struggled for words. How did he explain this? "He's not badly injured. Exposure and dehydration, but no serious wounds." "No wounds?" The elder's confusion bled through the static. "But the territory? The lions, we thought—" "How long has he been missing?" Michael interrupted, needing facts before he attempted explanation. "Since before dawn. His grandmother woke and found him gone from her hut. We've had 30 men searching since first light." Elder Lebu's voice tightened. "Dr. Harrison, that territory you're in, it's active lion ground. A lioness dens less than 2 kilometers from your position. If the boy has no serious injuries, then God has shown mercy." Michael looked at the pressure marks on the child's shoulders, at the saliva-damp fabric, at the impossible gentleness written into small bruises that should have been fatal punctures. "Elder Lebu," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something, but I need to tell you in person. It's—" His voice failed. "How did you say this? How did you speak miracle into radio static and expect belief? Tell me what?" The elder's voice sharpened with concern. "Dr. Harrison, what happened to Nasha?" Michael closed his eyes. "A lioness brought him to me." The silence stretched so long Michael thought the connection had dropped. "Say again?" Elder Lebu finally spoke, his tone carefully neutral. "A lioness. She carried him to my jeep and placed him on the ground, unharmed. Then she left." Saying it out loud made it even more impossible. The words hung in the radio static like something from mythology. Another long silence. "You're certain of what you saw?" No skepticism in the elder's voice now. Something else. Something that sounded like reverence. I watched her approach from 200 meters. I saw her place him down. I examined the boy. He has pressure marks from her jaw, but no penetration, no scratches. She carried him the way lions carry cubs. Michael's scientific training demanded rational explanation. His eyes had witnessed miracle. "We're coming," Elder Lebu said quietly. "Stay where you are. We're bringing his grandmother. Don't move him if you can help it." The radio clicked off. Michael gave the child, Nasha, another careful sip of water. The boy's crying had subsided to small, hiccuping whimpers. His eyes were half closed, exhaustion finally overwhelming fear. Michael wrapped him in a blanket from the emergency kit and held him carefully, monitoring his breathing, his color, his responsiveness. Standard medical protocol for exposure and dehydration. The familiar routine helped steady Michael's hands, helped him focus on concrete actions instead of the impossible question circling his mind. Why? Why would a wild lioness carry a human child 6 kilometers? Why approach a vehicle instead of disappearing into territory where humans rarely ventured? Why show restraint that contradicted every predatory instinct? The morning sun climbed higher, pressing heat down onto the grassland. Dust devils spun in the distance. A secretary bird strutted past the jeep, hunting for snakes in the grass where the lioness had sat. The world continued its normal patterns as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But the pressure marks on the child's skin didn't lie. The saliva drying on his clothing didn't lie. The trajectory of paw prints leading to this exact spot, Michael could see them now in the dusty earth, didn't lie. He held the boy and waited, staring at the grass where she'd disappeared. His colleagues would call this coincidence lucky timing. They'd construct explanations rooted in territorial behavior and random chance. But Michael had seen her eyes, had watched her wait until the child was safe before leaving, had felt the weight of intelligence in that final glance. The search party arrived 30 minutes later. What Elder Lebu revealed made Michael's blood run cold. 3 vehicles arrived in a cloud of dust, 2 pickup trucks filled with search party members and Elder Lebu's jeep. A woman leaped out before the vehicles fully stopped, running toward Michael with a cry that held every mother's worst fear transformed into relief. The grandmother. She reached for Nasha with shaking hands, speaking rapid Ma that Michael couldn't follow, checking her grandson with the same desperate efficiency Michael had used, touching his face, his hands, his small body, confirming reality. The boy stirred in her arms, whimpering, and she clutched him tighter. Elder Lebu approached more slowly. He was perhaps 70, his face deeply lined, his traditional red shuka draped over Western clothing. His eyes moved from the child to Michael, to the grass beyond, reading the territory with the knowledge of someone who'd lived alongside predators for decades. "Show me," he said simply. Michael led him to where the lioness had placed Nasha. The impression in the grass was still visible, a small, flattened circle where the child had lain. Beyond it, the deeper marks where the lioness had sat. Her paw prints led away into the grassland, clear as signatures in the dusty earth. Elder Lebu knelt, examining the prints with careful attention. Touched the grass where she'd rested. His fingers traced the trajectory of her approach, reading story in disturbed vegetation and compressed soil. "She came from the east," he said quietly. "From the water source at Olkeri." "That's 5 kilometers from here." Michael's throat tightened. "At least." 5.5. The elder stood, his knees creaking. He called over 2 men from the search party, speaking in Ma. They nodded and set off, following the lioness's back trail. "Elder Lebu," Michael started, but the older man raised a hand. Let them track first, then we'll understand. The grandmother approached, still holding Nasha. She spoke to the elder in Ma, her voice thick with tears. He responded gently, then turned to Michael. She wants to see the marks, the places where the lioness held him. Michael carefully showed her the pressure indentations on Nasha's shoulders and back. The grandmother's fingers trembled as she touched them. She spoke again, and the elder translated. She says, "These are the marks of a mother's mouth, not a killer's." 20 minutes later, the trackers returned. One of them carried a small cloth, a child's blanket, torn and muddy. He spoke rapidly to Elder Lebu, gesturing back the way they'd come. The elder's face grew grave. He turned to Michael. They found where Nasha reached the water source, his footprints in the mud, and they found where the lioness found him. How far? The water source is 5.5 kilometers from here, but Nasha's prints... The elder paused. They wander. He was walking in circles, confused. The distance he covered was closer to 7 kilometers from the village. A 3-year-old child, alone in lion territory for... He checked his watch. Nearly 6 hours. Michael's legs buckled. He sat down hard on the jeep's running board. A 3-year-old couldn't walk 7 kilometers. The terrain between here and the village wasn't flat grassland. It was broken by ravines, rocky outcrops, dense thorn bush. Even adults struggled with that territory. The lioness found him at the water? Michael asked. Yes, the trackers found where her prints appear. She came from her den site to drink, found the child instead. Elder Lebu's voice dropped. And then her tracks follow his wandering path backward toward your position. But the spacing changes. Changes how? She wasn't following at a distance. The tracks overlay his in places, and there are drag marks. The elder met Michael's eyes. She was pulling him when the ground was too difficult. Carrying him over obstacles, the trackers found 4 places where she rested, where she laid down to adjust her grip. Michael stood at the water source where a lost child's footprints disappeared into lion tracks and the morning sun felt too bright, too sharp. A grieving mother had chosen rescue over predation, had chosen a strange human in a metal box over her own empty den. Nature wasn't supposed to work this way. But the tracks didn't lie. "Elder Lebu," Michael's voice came out hoarse. "Why would she do this?" The old man was quiet for a long moment, studying the horizon where heat waves already shimmered. 3 weeks ago, he finally said, hyenas attacked a lion den 2 kilometers from here. Killed all the cubs. 4 of them. The mother survived. He looked at Michael. "That lioness, we call her Nala. The villagers know her. She's been alone since then." Michael's chest constricted. She lost her cubs. All of them. Elder Lebu gestured toward the grass where the lioness had disappeared. "That was Nala who brought your grandson to you." What Elder Lebu said next made Michael understand the impossible weight of what happened. "Your jeep," Elder Lebu said, walking around the vehicle slowly. "She knows it," Michael frowned. "What do you mean?" 2 months ago, the conservation team responded to reports of an injured lioness in this territory. Wire snare embedded in her front paw. Poacher's trap. The wound was infected. She was limping badly. The elder touched the faded conservation logo on the jeep's door. "This vehicle, your team sedated her, removed the wire, treated the infection, and released her." The world tilted. Michael gripped the jeep's hood to steady himself. "This exact vehicle?" "The markings match. The conservation team only has 2 jeeps for emergency wildlife response. This is one of them." Elder Lebu's voice was quiet but certain. "Nala was sedated beside a jeep. that looked exactly like this was treated by people who came from a jeep like this, and when she found a lost child, she brought him to a jeep like this. Michael finished, his voice barely a whisper. One of the trackers called out. He'd moved further along the lioness's path, following her trail toward Michael's position. Elder Lebu and Michael joined him. The tracker pointed to marks in the earth, long scrapes where something heavy had been dragged. Between them, small footprints. The tracker spoke in Ma, and Elder Lebu translated. Here, this ravine, see how it drops 2 meters? Too high for a small child to climb down safely. The elder crouched, examining the disturbed soil. The lioness dragged him, pulled him down by his clothing, carefully, so he wouldn't fall and injure himself on the rocks. They followed the trail further, found another spot where the earth was flattened in a large oval, the clear impression of a lion's body. Rest site, Elder Lebu said. She stopped here, laid down, probably adjusted her grip on the child. He pointed to small circular depressions near the lion's body print. Nasha's footprints. She let him stand while she rested, then picked him up again and continued. Michael counted 4 such rest sites as they traced the route. Each one told the same story. The lioness, stopping, carefully placing the child down, resting, then resuming her burden. The spacing suggested she'd traveled for over 3 hours carrying Nasha from the water source to Michael's jeep. 3 hours carrying a human child across difficult terrain, adjusting her grip to avoid injury, pulling him over obstacles, resting when needed, but never abandoning him. The search party moved quietly, speaking in hushed tones. Some of the men touched the lion's paw prints as they passed, their faces showing something between fear and reverence. This wasn't behavior they could explain with traditional knowledge of lion nature. This was something else. Dr. Harrison? Elder Lebu stood beside the 4th rest site, the one closest to where Michael had been parked. When the conservation team treated Nala's paw, do you know what happened after they released her? Michael shook his head. She didn't run. Most wild animals, when the sedation wears off, they flee immediately, terrified. But Nala, the elder's voice carried weight. The team leader told me she stood for several minutes, tested her weight on the treated paw, looked at the humans, then walked away slowly, not running, like she understood they'd helped her. Animal behaviorists debate the memory capacity of wild felids. Recognition of specific vehicles? Possible. Association between vehicles and medical help? Documented in habituated populations. But carrying an orphaned human child 3 hours through dangerous territory to reach that vehicle? That's where science stops and wonder begins. Michael sat in the grass beside those tiny footprints and lion tracks converging, and something in his chest came undone. She remembered. A wild predator remembered mercy and returned it. The loneliness that brought him to Africa, the silence after Margaret died, suddenly didn't feel so vast. The world still held impossible kindness. She knew. Michael's voice broke. She found a lost child and remembered that jeeps like mine mean help, mean safety. Yes. Elder Lebu placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, and she carried him 6 kilometers to find it. The grandmother approached, still holding Nasha. She knelt beside Michael and spoke in Ma, her words soft but intense. The elder translated. She says her grandson carries the marks of a mother's love, that the lioness who lost her own children couldn't bear to let another child die. She says, his voice thickened. She says Nala gave back the mercy your people showed her. Michael looked at the paw prints leading away into grass. at the rest sites marking her journey, at the drag marks where she'd protected Nasha from falls, at the evidence of impossible compassion written in dust and disturbed earth. "Will she come back?" he asked. Elder Lebu was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, but we will honor what she did." Recording this account, I realized I was documenting something that rewrites our understanding of animal consciousness. If you feel your perspective shifting, subscribe to the channel. Real stories from the wild continue here. 23 days later, Michael saw her again. What happened made him believe in a consciousness deeper than science admits. Michael stayed in Tanzania. He told himself it was to complete his volunteer commitment, to finish the research documentation he'd started. But the truth sat heavier. He couldn't leave without understanding what he'd witnessed. He spent hours in the conservation office, reviewing records. Found the file on Nala's treatment 2 months before Nasha's rescue. The photographs showed a lioness in clear distress, her right front paw swollen to twice its normal size, the wire snare embedded so deeply it had cut to bone. The infection had been severe. Without intervention, she would have lost the paw, probably her life. The treatment log noted something unusual. Dr. Sarah Kimathi, the veterinarian who'd performed the procedure, had written, "Subject remained unusually calm post-sedation. No aggressive behavior upon full consciousness. Tested paw weight bearing while team still present. Departed without flight response. Recommend continued monitoring. Atypical behavior for wild lion." Michael contacted Dr. Kimathi by phone. She remembered Nala clearly. "That lioness understood we'd helped her," Sarah said, her voice crackling over the connection. "I know how that sounds. I know what the journals would say about anthropomorphizing. But Michael, I've treated dozens of wild lions. They wake from sedation terrified and aggressive. They run the moment they can coordinate their legs." Nala was different. She looked at us, really looked, then walked away like she was thinking. "Did she favor the treated paw?" Michael asked. "For about 2 weeks, according to camera trap footage. Then she was moving normally, full recovery." Sarah paused. "Why are you asking about her specifically?" Michael told her everything. The child, the careful carrying, the approach to his jeep, the evidence of 3 hours traveling with a human boy in her jaws. Sarah was silent for so long, Michael thought the connection had dropped. "Send me your documentation," she finally said, her voice tight. "All of it. Photos, GPS data, witness statements, everything." Michael did, then waited. 3 days later, Sarah appeared at the research station. She'd driven 5 hours from her posting to see the site in person. Together they walked the route the trackers had mapped, from the water source where Nala found Nasha to the observation point where she'd delivered him. Sarah examined each rest site, took soil samples from the drag marks, photographed everything with meticulous precision. She was building a case. Michael understood. She wanted to believe, but needed proof that would satisfy scientific scrutiny. At the 4th rest site, Sarah crouched for a long time, her fingers tracing the depression where Nala had lain. 3 hours, she said quietly. A wild lioness carried a human child for 3 hours, stopped to rest, adjusted her grip to prevent injury, changed her route to avoid difficult terrain. She looked up at Michael. "Do you know what the literature says about cross-species maternal behavior in wild felids?" "That it doesn't exist." "That it doesn't exist," she confirmed. "Captive animals, yes, habituated populations, showing tolerance occasionally. But active protection of another species' young, deliberate transport to safety, recognition of human vehicles as sources of help?" She stood, brushing dust from her knees. "We're documenting something unprecedented." But documentation wasn't the same as acceptance. Sarah submitted their joint case report to the International Journal of Wildlife Behavior. The response came back within 2 weeks, declined for publication. Insufficient controls, anecdotal evidence, alternative explanations not adequately excluded. They think she was carrying prey, Sarah said bitterly, showing Michael the rejection letter, that we interrupted her before she could consume the child, that the delivery was actually territorial display or caching behavior. Michael read the reviewer's comments. Each one dismissed consciousness, choice, memory. Each one reduced Nala's actions to instinct misinterpreted by observers desperate for meaning. They weren't there, he said simply. They didn't see her eyes. Elder Lebu visited the research station that evening, found Michael and Sarah reviewing footage from camera traps, searching for additional evidence of Nala's behavior patterns. "You're trying to prove what happened," the elder observed. "Yes." Michael didn't look up from the screen. "To whom?" That made Michael pause. He met the elder's steady gaze. "To people who need proof more than truth," Elder Lebu said gently. "But there's something else you should know. The village is preparing a ceremony for Nala. We're going to honor what she did." He smiled slightly. "We don't need journals to tell us what we witnessed, and I think, maybe, she deserves to know she's recognized." Michael's heart began to race. "When?" "Tomorrow, dawn, at the observation point." The elder's eyes held quiet certainty. "She's still in the territory. My herders see her most days. She stays on the edges watching. I believe she'll come if we call her properly." Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. A ceremony, a calling. The chance to see Nala again, to close the circle that had opened the morning she delivered a child to safety. "We'll be there," Michael said. That night, he couldn't sleep. Tomorrow would bring either confirmation or closure. Either way, he needed to witness it. Dawn arrived with the kind of clarity that makes everything look freshly created. Michael and Sarah reached the observation point as first light touched the grassland, turning dew into diamonds on every blade of grass. The village gathering was already there. Elder Lebu stood at the center, his red shuka brilliant in the early light. Nasha's grandmother held the boy. He'd grown in 3 weeks, his cheeks fuller, his eyes bright. 3 other village women arranged ceremonial items: fresh goat meat, beaded ornaments, burning herbs that sent fragrant smoke spiraling upward. "Dr. Harrison, Dr. Kimathi." Elder Lebu greeted them formally. "You're here to witness." "What exactly are we witnessing?" Sarah asked quietly. "Gratitude, in the old way." The elder gestured to the meat. "We're offering compensation for the livestock Nala hasn't taken, honoring a predator who chose mercy over hunger." The grandmother approached, still carrying Nasha. She spoke to Elder Lebu in Ma, and he translated. She wants to show Nasha to the lioness, to let Nala see that the child lives and grows strong. She believes Nala deserves to know her choice mattered. Sarah's hand found Michael's arm, gripping tight. Neither of them spoke. The women began to sing. Their voices rose in harmonies that seemed to pull sound from the earth itself, from acacia roots and ancient stones. They sang in Ma, but the meaning transcended language, grief and gratitude woven together, the acknowledgement that life and death dance in the same circle. Elder Lebu placed the goat meat at the territory's edge, speaking words Michael couldn't understand but felt in his sternum. The smoke thickened, visible for kilometers. Michael raised his binoculars with shaking hands, scanned the distant grass. Nothing. Just emerald waves moving in the breeze, secretary birds hunting, a lone giraffe browsing acacia. Then Sarah gasped. "There, 2 o'clock, 200 meters." Michael swung the binoculars. His breath stopped. Nala stood at the grassland's edge, fully visible in golden light. She watched the ceremony with those amber eyes Michael had seen in his dreams for 3 weeks. The notch in her left ear confirmed her identity. This was the lioness who'd carried death in her jaws and delivered life instead. "She came," he whispered. The women's singing intensified. The grandmother lifted Nasha higher, turning him toward the grassland. The boy didn't understand, too young for understanding, but he saw the lioness. His small hand reached out, fingers opening and closing, wanting to touch something beyond reach. Nala moved, 3 steps forward, emerging completely from concealing vegetation, magnificent, muscled, scarred, her coat gleaming, every inch a predator built by millions of years of evolution to kill. But she wasn't hunting now. Through the binoculars, Michael saw her eyes track Nasha's reaching gesture, saw her ears rotate forward, attention, not aggression. Her tail swished once, that slow, deliberate movement, the movement of a cat who was thinking. "My God," Sarah breathed, "she recognizes him." The moment stretched, the women sang, the smoke rose, the child reached toward a lioness who'd carried him in jaws that could crush bone. And Nala stood perfectly still, watching the boy who lived because she chose differently. In that moment, Michael felt something shift in the universe. The boundary between human and wild, between predator and protector, between instinct and choice, all of it blurred until he couldn't tell where one ended and another began. His hands shook so badly the binoculars rattled. Tears blurred his vision, but he didn't lower the lenses. This was why he'd come to Africa, not for routine field work or to fill the silence after Margaret died. For this, to witness the moment when everything he thought he knew about animals became insufficient. Nala's gaze shifted, found Michael across 200 meters of grassland. Through the binoculars, he saw her eyes lock onto his. She saw him, recognized the jeep, the human, the scent of the morning she'd brought her impossible burden. Recognition passed between them like electric current. The lioness held his gaze for 3 heartbeats, 4, 5. Then she turned away from the ceremony, from the child, from the humans who'd tried to say thank you. She took 10 steps back into the grass, paused at the edge of visibility, and looked back one final time. Not at the child, at Michael. Then she was gone, vanished into grassland that swallowed her golden form. The grass moved where she'd been, then settled. The morning continued. Birds called, the giraffe kept browsing, the sun climbed higher. But everything had changed. When Nala turned away, Michael watched through tears he didn't bother hiding. That lioness walked back to an empty den, to a territory where her own cubs would never grow. But somewhere in the grassland lived a human child who carried her jaw marks like gentle fingerprints. Nature's cruelty and kindness in the same golden pelt, disappearing into acacia shadows. The women's singing faded to silence. The ceremony was complete. Elder Lebu approached Michael and Sarah, his face wet with tears. "She came," the old man said simply. "She understood." Michael couldn't speak. His throat was too full, his chest too tight. He nodded, and Elder Lebu gripped his shoulder with the strength of someone who'd lived his entire life reading the language of predators. Sarah checked her camera, making sure she'd captured the footage. Her hands shook as badly as Michael's. "Did we just—" she started, then stopped. "Michael, did that actually happen?" He knew what she meant. The journals would reject this too. The reviewers would say it was territorial overlap, coincidental timing, projected meaning. They'd never accept that a wild lioness had responded to a ceremony of gratitude. But they weren't there. They didn't see Nala's eyes find that reaching child. Didn't feel the weight of recognition passing between species. "It happened," Michael said, his voice rough. "Every impossible second of it. 3 months later, he would board a plane back to Oregon, but he would never really leave this grassland." Michael returned to Oregon 3 months after the ceremony. The flight felt endless. Dar es Salaam to Amsterdam to Portland, 30 hours of recycled air and plastic meals, and the impossible task of leaving Africa behind. But Africa didn't stay behind. It came with him, lived in him, changed the shape of his thoughts. He kept Nasha's photograph on his desk in the small consulting office he still maintained, kept the map of Tanzania on his wall with the route marked in yellow highlighter, 6 kilometers from water source to observation point, the path a grieving lioness traveled carrying borrowed hope. Some nights he stood before that map and traced the journey with his finger, imagining each rest site, each careful adjustment of her grip, each decision to continue instead of abandon. Elder Lebu sent updates through email, technology bridging the gap between their worlds. Nala remained in the territory. She hadn't attacked village livestock, though opportunities presented themselves daily. The herders reported seeing her on the edges, watching but not threatening. The village council had declared her territory protected. No poaching, no harassment, no retaliation if she ever did take a goat. "We owe her a debt," Elder Lebu wrote. "Some debts outlive the moment they're created." Nasha was growing. The grandmother sent photos, the boy learning. To walk steadily, to speak simple words, to laugh with the unself-conscious joy of toddlers who don't yet know the world contains danger. In one photo, he wore the beaded protection bracelet, now too small for his wrist, tied around his neck instead. The pressure marks from Nala's jaws had faded to faint shadows on his shoulders, visible only if you knew to look. Michael showed the photos to colleagues sometimes, mentioned casually that he'd been involved in an unusual wildlife interaction during his volunteer work. Their responses were predictable, polite interest followed by rational explanations. Coincidence? Fortunate timing? Perhaps the lioness was habituated to human presence. Perhaps she'd been carrying the child to cache for later consumption and was simply interrupted. He stopped trying to convince them. They needed their explanations more than they needed truth. Sarah Kimethi continued fighting the academic battle. She'd submitted their case report to 4 different journals now, 4 rejections. The language was always similar. Insufficient evidence of conscious decision-making, anthropomorphic interpretation, alternative explanations not adequately excluded. She called Michael every few weeks, frustrated but determined. "They want controlled conditions," she said during their last conversation. "How do you create controlled conditions for a miracle?" "You don't," Michael told her. "You just bear witness." He visited the Oregon Zoo sometimes, stood at the lion exhibit watching the pride lounge in their carefully designed habitat. He searched their amber eyes for what he'd seen in Nala, that capacity for cross-species compassion, for choice that transcended instinct. He never found it, because it wasn't about species or biology. It was about a specific lioness on a specific morning who looked at a lost human child and saw something worth saving. Michael told me he goes to the zoo and watches the lions, searching their eyes for what he saw in that Tanzanian grassland. He never finds it, because it wasn't about species or biology. It was about a specific lioness who carried hope instead of death. 3 years after Nasha's rescue, Michael received a package from Elder Lebu. Inside, a small beaded bracelet, child-sized, the one Nasha had worn in the photograph. A letter explained that Nasha had outgrown it completely. The grandmother wanted Michael to have it, a reminder of the morning when boundaries dissolved. Michael keeps it in his desk drawer, takes it out sometimes when the Oregon rain sounds too different from African thunderstorms, when the silence of his house presses too heavy. He holds that circle of beads and remembers amber eyes, remembers singing that came from the earth, remembers the weight of recognition passing between species. The scientific journals will likely never accept their account. The evidence remains too anecdotal, the behavior too anthropomorphized, the conclusion too comfortable. But Nasha carries those gentle jaw marks on his skin like a language between species. And somewhere in Tanzania, a lioness with an empty den walks territory that now protects her. Michael keeps the map on his wall, 6 kilometers marked in yellow highlighter. Some nights he stands before it and traces the path. A grieving mother carrying borrowed hope through the dark. He thinks about his own grief after Margaret died, how he came to Africa searching for something to fill the silence. He found it in the most impossible way, in a wild creature who taught him that love doesn't stop at species boundaries, that mercy can have fur and fangs, that the world still holds miracles too strange for journals and too true for doubt. His colleagues say he's romanticizing predator behavior. He doesn't argue anymore. He just remembers those amber eyes watching a child she saved and feels his heart break open again with the beauty of what shouldn't be possible but happened anyway. The last thing Michael sees before sleep, a lioness turning away from a ceremony she couldn't understand, toward a den that stays empty, carrying in her chest the weight of a choice that saved one life while her own cubs stay gone. Grace and grief in the same golden body, walking into grass that swallows all footprints but cannot erase what happened. If you've witnessed the impossible wisdom of animals, write "Nature remembers kindness" in the comments. If your understanding of the wild has been changed by a single moment, share your story below. These encounters remind us we share this world with consciousness deeper than we admit.